Okay, so we went ahead and started recording. And so if you guys are taking a look at my screen share, we're going to talk about two topics today in JavaScript, and that is string manipulation and the dates, right? And so why are these two important? Why are these two topics important? And so, anytime you have application, anytime you have software, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the most important piece is working with the data. The data is always the valuable part of a system, okay? And I've said this before, I'm going to repeat it. It used to be the world's most valuable commodity was oil, right? For like 100 years, the most valuable thing in this world was oil. And somewhere in the last 10 years, that has changed. There's actually something in this world more valuable than oil, and that something is data. Okay, data is now the world's most valuable commodity. And if you get into that industry, if you get into, selling users information, right? What is Facebook doing? Collecting information about you and selling that to their marketing partners. What is Google doing? Collecting information about you and selling that to their, marketing partners, right? Data is the most important thing in the world. So anytime you're building software, whether it's mobile software, whether it's web software, whether it's desktop apps, command line apps, got a little echo.
Not me this time.
That's all right. We're good. All good. Data is the most important piece. So we're always working with data, right? Knowing how to do events and knowing how to have buttons on the page and text boxes, like that's all ultimately to work with data, right? These networking cables and frankly the computers and hard drive and RAM and processors, like it's all just there to work with data. So data is really important, and that's a key thing about our job, is ultimately working with data. So when we're working with data, one type of data that we're always working with is strings. And people are going to type in, when you give them a text box, they're going to type in whatever they want. And so we have to be able to take what they give us and maybe manipulate it or even force them into giving them what we're looking for, right? We need data maybe in a certain format or in a certain shape or how we're expecting it. Anyways, we need to be able to take that data and manipulate it, right? And so really what we're talking about here is manipulating strings, manipulating data, the information that people are giving us, maybe their username, maybe their password, maybe their city, maybe their state, right? Take it and manipulate it so that we can make it what we want or use it how we want to use it, again, because it's valuable. And maybe, for example, they give you a lot of information and you only need a small piece of it, right? If they give you like a paragraph and you just want the first sentence, I don't know, I'm just making something up, right? You have to be able to manipulate what they give you and turn it into what you want. That's what string manipulation is. And then we're going to learn how to work with dates. When things occur are very important, right? And keeping track of dates and times. I would say dates and times. Okay, now in JavaScript, kind of a weird thing is that there's one entity for working with both dates and times. In other languages, you might have a date thing and you have a time thing. And when I say a thing, objects. That's what they're called in most languages. But in JavaScript, they're just one thing. There's not separate things. Okay? So that's kind of the prerequisite. Like, why is this important? It's because we're working with the data. We're learning to work with and manipulate data. And so let's kind of start with this. Now, all I have is a web page with a button click, and I got a little text box wired up. So this is really quite simple. Maybe I go ahead and put in like a I got Bootstrap here wired up. I don't really care. I was going to throw a dark background, Bootstrap class. This is not the point of the video, but I get sidetracked and I didn't type my BG background. Is it BG hyphen? Let me look it up. Background color. It is a hyphen. How quickly we forget. And let's go ahead and put in like an H2 for our output. Okay, so we got a button click, and just to make sure that we're wired up still, let's go ahead and select with query selector the ID of output. You can use inner HTML to wire up a little HTML. There's also inner text, which is considered a little bit more safe and secure, but we'll use inner HTML for now. Equals okay. Just getting up and running this morning, and it doesn't like my selector. Cannot set properties of null. How many of you have seen this error? Cannot set properties of null. If you've ever written JavaScript, you've probably seen this error, and what that means is it doesn't like our selector. Cannot set this inner HTML property of our ID of output. Now, why that might be happening? Output is a tag. It might be kind of like a reserved keyword that is not really a good I'll just call it out. So I'm going to change this from output to out. Document query selector out inner HTML. And so, oh, it's saying on click. It's setting the on click property. So it's not that, it's button validate. I changed my ID of my button to button submit. So let's do that, button submit. And okay, we're getting hi mom in our heading, so we're wired up. Okay. Let's get into string manipulation now that we're wired up. And so when working with string manipulation, first off, let's go ahead and store our data in a let, because we're going to be manipulating the variable. I'm going to store it in a let with the assumption that we'll be making some changes. And document query selector, the ID of my text box, which is, I call this text number. I'll just call this text input. Text input, because it's no longer just going to be, and because it's a text box, we're going to be using the dot value. And let's just put that in our output. So let's read a variable called data, and let's put data in the H2. So kind of just start like this, document get element by ID. We called it out.inner HTML equals data. Okay, so read something out of a text box, put it into an H2, click submit, and we get high class. Okay. So what we're working with is a string. Step number one is understanding what comes out of the value property of a text box. We're selecting a text box. Text boxes have properties. One of those values is the value property. This returns a string. So we're storing a string in our variable called data. And because it's a string, we're able to manipulate that data. One property that we've been exposed to is the length property. So understanding how long a string is, the number of characters in a string is something very fundamental to understand about your data. How long is it? And so that's the length property, and that would be the first thing that I would kind of take a look at in understanding string manipulation. So if I kind of go back to this and I say hi class, I get the value of 8. Now how many letters are there? Count those real quick. Someone tell me.
7.
There's 7 letters, but yet my number is 8. Anyone? Because of the space. So when you're counting the number of characters in a string, it does include spaces. So that's just something to be aware of. It's not a trick. A space is a character. It is a valid character. So it's not intuitive, but it is correct. Okay? So that's the first thing to understand about strings, is that strings have a dot length property to determine the number of characters in the string. Great. Keep in mind, properties are pieces of information and methods are behaviors. So when we're looking at string manipulation, we're going to be looking at 2 things. We're going to be looking at both properties of strings and methods of strings. Okay, so the next thing we might look at is a method, and maybe I'll kind of keep my notes if I'm going to break these apart. Right? I'll say properties, and the first one is dot length. And then I'll say methods, and we'll jump into our first method, which is char at. Now, what char at does, by the way, you're going to notice all my methods have parentheses, right? So if I do data dot char at and parentheses. Now, remember that these parentheses signify method. We're calling a method. And this char at method is looking for an input. Remember, methods have optional inputs, right? What are those called inside the parentheses when you're declaring a method? Those are called parameters. Right? So this method called char at has a parameter. That parameter, it gives us some notes. It says string.char at says this 0-based index of the desired character returns the character at the index. So it's a 0-based index, meaning they start the count at 0. So char at 0. What would you anticipate char at 0 does for us? On high class, what do you think is going to come back? Yeah. And if I change it to a 1, what comes back? The I. Everyone kind of see where this is going? If I say 2, what comes back? Space. You know, space doesn't look like much. Does everyone kind of get a feel for the char at 3? Now, when I'm learning these things, I'm going, really? This is important? You're telling me to like figure out how? It's like, well, by itself, the length property doesn't amount to much. By itself, char at doesn't amount to much. But when you start combining these tools, right, that's how you can solve some problems, right? By itself, knowing the length of a string isn't that useful. But if you know the length of a string, can you loop over it? Yeah, you could loop over it and then character by character examine what's going on. So let's take an example where we can combine these two things, the length and the char at, and solve a problem. So the problem, count vowels. That you guys have already seen this problem. And so let's go ahead and have a for loop. And I'm going to delete the guts of the for loop here. And instead of looping through array.length, I'm going to loop through data.length. So here's the length property. So what does this say? From I, while I is less than the length of our string. Then what are we going to do? If data and dot char at index equals an A. Is it case sensitive? It's absolutely case sensitive. If data, now this is one way of solving this. You didn't necessarily know these methods at the time, so you might not have solved it this way, which is completely fine. Let's put let total vowels equal 0. And then if data char at index is an A, it's probably wants 3 equal signs. Whoops. We're going to say total vowels plus plus goes up by 1. We just combine a lot of concepts all together at once to solve a problem. How many vowels? Now, you would argue, how often are you counting vowels? Okay, that's a valid argument, right? But together, when you start learning these tools, together you add these tools together and you can start solving problems. Individually, I would agree, individually, maybe not all that useful at the end of my for loop. So this loops through each letter in our string, and it's just looking for an A. Now I'm not looking for the rest of the vowels, but then at the end of this, let's output document query selector. I think I called it out dot. I'm going to use inner text and total vowels. Okay. So let's try A, B, C, D, E, A. And I probably have my inner text not, oh, it doesn't like my properties of null. Inner text of null, I thought I called it out. It's ID of out. So let's try again. Okay, it counted the fact that I have 2 vowels, well, at least 2 letter A's. Okay, so as I'm going through these different methods and different properties, realize a lot of times you got to use these tools in combination together. Now another way of accessing, instead of using char at, you could also treat a string like an array. So literally this and this work the same way. Everyone take a look at this, right? Using char at works the same way as treating that string as an array of characters. So my string is data. I can use the index as the subscript of the array. And so, you can see char at being used. You can also see this kind of solution, and this is going to work the same way, where that counts that. Okay, let's look at some more methods. One thing that's quite useful, there's a couple of methods that I want to expose. One would be 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase. Okay, and these do exactly what you might suspect. Let me kind of take the data and take data dot to uppercase. It's a method. This method does not take any inputs, right? So you can transform the data that they give you, and I closed my window. Shame on me. You can take the data they give you, say hi class, and make it all caps. So why is this important? Again, people input data in all sorts of formats. They give you capital letters, they give you lowercase letters. You know, if you ask for someone's state, type out your state. Well, someone will type in the first letter capitalized, the rest lowercase. Someone might type it all lowercase. Some people, when they're feeling, when they're feeling it, they're going to type it in all uppercase. Okay? You cannot rely on users to be consistent. They're going to be inconsistent. And for that reason, you want to take the data and make it consistent. One way of manipulating the data is taking whatever case they give you and converting it either to all uppercase. Of course, to lowercase is just as useful. Okay, so that's quite nice. Now let me put a couple spaces here, which is interesting. It's not outputting that in my HTML. Why? Because HTML doesn't read the white space, right? Like in our source code, remember, and you guys will remember this, if I were to just go into here and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, remember you put a whole bunch of spaces here and say default data, right? Remember that the browser takes that white space and it doesn't really care about it, right? But suffice to say, if a user gives you some input with some spaces in it in the beginning, this is the data. Instead of putting that in the HTML, let me just alert this. Instead of putting this in the HTML, let me just alert data and see if that actually, it's not real. It's kind of hard to demo that it does in fact store those spaces. Let me console log it. Console.log data. Okay, in the console log, it does show it in the console. Why is this method that I'm going to show is another useful method called trim. Why is trim useful? Well, first off, what do you think trim does? Gets rid of spaces. Specifically on the front end. It doesn't get rid of spaces in the middle. Okay, you want to get rid of spaces in the middle, you might write some custom logic. But what trim does is it gets rid of accidental spacebar hits. I'm not going to say that happens all the time, but do you think it happens occasionally? I would say, I would bet that it does. Okay, so what happens is, for example, the user goes to register their account and they accidentally put a space in the front of their username. And then they go to log back in using their username, not realizing there's a space there. And all of a sudden they can't log in. Do you think that's a problem? Absolutely. Right? So what we often want to do is we want to trim our data, and that deletes the accidental spaces that they might have typed. And so if I do that, if I do data.trim, again, trim is a method that removes spaces at the front and the end. And now if I put those spaces in there and I submit it, notice in my console, I don't have a bunch of space. accidentally at the beginning. And again, it does also trim at the end. Okay, so accidental spaces at the front and the end would be deleted, and that's the benefit of trim. Okay, again, individually these tools are like, but in combination they're powerful. What else? There are a lot of times you want to substring. What is a substring? Let's talk about substring. First off, a substring is the idea of this concept of you've got some information, you don't need all of it, you need a portion of it. Okay, that's what substring is. It's a, hey, you gave me 100 characters and I just need the first 5 characters, or I just need the last 5 characters, or whatever it may be. I need the user's first name. I don't need their entire name. Just if you have a full name, you might want to substring the first name and get the first name out and extract the second name out. So think of it as extracting information out of a bigger chunk. So that's what substring is. So let's go ahead and bring back in data. There's actually 2 substring methods, and they work a little bit differently. I'll just talk about the one called substring. The book will kind of cover a different one, substr. They both more or less do the same thing. They both do substrings, but they work slightly differently. I'm just going to talk about one. I'm going to talk about the substring method. So, by the way, you can chain, right? So I could do data to lowercase dot trim. We're chaining methods together, and you've done this probably by now. So we're going to lowercase our data. We're going to trim it and substring it. All lowercase substring. Now taking a look at this, look at the inputs for substring. It actually takes 2 inputs. And you could tell that by the tooltip. The first one is the 0-based index number indicating the beginning of the substring. So at what character do we start counting? Let's just start counting at character 0. That's the first character. And the second one is a 0-based index number indicating the end of the substring. The substring includes the characters up to, but not including the character indicated by the end. So let's just put 0, just going to put 0, 1. Okay, any guesses what this is going to output 0, 1? High class? So it starts at 0, ends at 1. Let's put 0, 4. Do you remember, I was a kid of the 90s, High C. There was a Slimer High C from Ghostbusters. There was a green High C. That thing had to have so much sugar in it. It was delicious. Total side note there. We're starting at 0, ending at 4, not including 4. 0, 1, 2, 3. Up to not including 4. 0, 1, 2, and 3 are what we're seeing here. Right? And you can kind of extrapolate that out. Starting at 0, going to 5, not including 5. Let's do 0 through, if you wanted the length of the string, we'd say data.length. We could actually pass in the length as the second piece of information here. And there we go. And that just returns the whole length of the string. Not that useful. But you can do a little bit of creative stuff in here too. Like, what if you want everything but the last character? Well, this gives you everything, right? This gives you everything. What if you want everything but the last character? Well, you could do length -1. Right? So everything but the last 2 characters. Okay? So this is kind of a thing where you take the length and start taking things off of the end, because you don't know how many characters they're going to give you, right? Again, if I put some different inputs in here, this is everything but the last 2 characters. So I will say that understanding that substring takes 2 inputs. The first one is the starting character. Now, what if I don't want that first character? Well, then I started at 1. So this starts at 1 and everything but the last 2. So substring, you can play with this a million ways and extrapolate the data out. Again, going back to, does this seem all that impressive to me on the surface? No. But when you start understanding the value of data, and this is the kind of stuff, ultimately, JavaScript and JavaScript cookies. JavaScript cookies is the first way we're going to start to learn to save data, right? As we start to learn to save data, then once you save the data, then you can sell the data, right? So that's why you go to websites nowadays and there's cookie policies and they pop up. It's actually a law, I think, over in Europe. Right? Over in Europe, there's a law that your websites have to have a cookie policy that posts up on the page that tells the user how they're going to use their data. You guys have been to websites like that? Mm-hmm. How many people have seen that cookie policy pop up on various web pages? Not all the web pages, right? A lot of them. So if the web page, if the business is out of Europe, it's a law in Europe to do that. And that's within the last 5 years, right? That's kind of become law, right? And I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, it just really seems like the direction that we're heading. Yeah.
Would you say it's more ethical than?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I figured.
Yeah. If most people don't know that, Facebook is free. It's not free. You're paying for it with your information. You're paying for it with, a lot of people would say, your privacy, your relationships, your likes. You're paying, just not with money, right? Yeah. Okay.
Your information from Google.
Yeah. So you're paying. Okay. What else is useful? Okay, those are really, and I wanted to keep this video to about an hour, and I'm at the 33-minute point. So I'm going to kind of stop talking about strings right here. Those are some, not all, of the useful string methods. And those methods can be used to solve a lot of problems. Okay. Let's move on to talk about dates. So the only property I talked about was the length property. Then we got charet, 2 lowercase, 2 uppercase, trim, substring. Let's talk about dates and times. In JavaScript, there's one structure that works with both dates and times. Some languages have a date object and a time object. JavaScript does not. JavaScript works with both dates and times in the same object. And so what I'll do is I'll make a variable called today equals new date. Okay, so what we actually created here, and if you're writing JavaScript for the first time, and you're following along with this class, and you're not really doing anything else, then this is the first what you would call object that we're creating. JavaScript, as I mentioned, is multi-paradigm, and so object-oriented programming is one of those paradigms, and so we have what are called objects in object-oriented programming. The date object is what we're creating here. So there are built-in objects, and then we can build our own custom objects. Date is just one of the built-in objects. And so let's just get today, and then let's just put it in our output. Okay, so we read a variable. Now, this line is called constructing. This is constructing a date object. And so, you know what constructing is? You're building. In construction, you're building. We're building an object in JavaScript. We're calling it today. We're going to go ahead and print it out on the page. And wow, that was easy. It is going to get the system date and time. So that is the Windows operating system, my operating system date and time. Looks like it's appropriately set. You're going to notice it's in Central. It gives both a date and a time. When it comes to what methods and what properties, the first one that we'll look at is toDate string. So here's a toDate string. Again, we'll look at methods and mostly methods. So these are methods of date and times, toDate string. So let's go ahead and take today dot toDate string. Well, that's useful, right? If you're not really interested in the time, well, now we have a method to extract just the date. And so probably a lot of times, maybe you're just interested in the date. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't really care what time the user registered necessarily. I want to know the date the user registered. I want to know, but maybe on a purchase, what time did you make the purchase? That's probably important information. So every scenario is going to be different. But okay, we have toDate string. Next method. How about get full year, get date, and get month. Okay, well, we can break it down from there. I mean, obviously, if toDate string is all three, the month, the date, and the year, well, let's put one output here. We'll use a template string. The year is, this would be today dot get full year, comma. The date is today dot get date, comma. What's left? And the month is today dot get. Okay. Point is, you can pull out each The year is 2022. The date is 28. Well, that's nice. It actually took my line break in there. And the month is 9. Let's see if it does that again.
I guess it's considering the line break as a character.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, but sure enough, it did.
It's part of the string.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. The year is 2022. The date is 28. The month is 9. You need to pull out each individual piece. Hey, not a problem. We got some built-in methods to do that. You might expect there is a get hours for the time, get minutes. So let's go ahead and put a period. The hours, the current hour is today.get hours, and the current minute is all right, it's 8:56 a.m. So it's kind of like doing a substring, like a date object comes with blah, all this information about today's date and time. And then you use these methods. These are all called getters, right? These are all called getters. Yeah.
So why is the month 9?
I'm sorry?
Why is the month displaying as 9? It shouldn't be 2.
0. Yeah, good question. Why is the month 9? Because January is 0, because computer science folks are weird. We start counting January at 0. Yeah. And so you have to account for that. Plus or whatever you got to do. Yeah. Yep. Let's see what else is useful. There is a get milliseconds. Should you really, kind of a tool that's been used in generating randomness out of a computer, trying to generate random behaviors, is kind of hard to tell a computer how to be random, because when you're giving something instructions, it's kind of, it's hard to, there's a whole spiel on this, but telling a computer how to behave, some would argue that a computer is never random for that reason. You're telling it what to do, so it can't generate something randomly. So, people who are pretty smart and savvy, when they understand how computer systems work, that's where the, I don't want to say hacking begins, but you can begin to game the system. Like there have been old school game shows where computers generate, what was it? No whammy, no whammy, no whammy, stop, right? That was a game show that was, a computer was generating randomness, this bouncing light going around a computer board. Someone figured out that wasn't quite so random because someone had to tell that how to bounce around, and they were able to game the system and, win this game show for like no one understood how this guy. Point is, there have been game shows that have been compromised. There have been casinos like slot machines that have been gamed, because computers are hard to generate randomness. However, it can be said that if you just let a user interact with the page and you can grab the millisecond that they did something, no one can predict the millisecond, right, that a behavior occurred. So if you use that millisecond as like a random number generator, like what's a random number? Well, I would say that where did I go wrong here? Oh, I put a comma in the wrong space. All that just to say, the millisecond is today.get milliseconds. Well, what's this number that's going to pop up for milliseconds? That's a pretty good random number. Could any of you predict what I'm about to click? You see what I'm saying? So you know, it's hard to generate randomness out of a computer system. Getting the milliseconds is one. What about get time? What I would hope to bring to your attention. What in the world?
Did it in milliseconds.
Yeah, look at that. 50 is the end. 116 is the end.
So if you looked at the,
If you're adding up all of the minutes and hours of today,
if you, so the countdown that me and Jacob did for our website, if you go through the source code, you have to tell it how many milliseconds equal a second and so forth to get it to display correctly.
Look at that. Did you know how many milliseconds have passed today? Now you do.
Actually, I think that may be months and years too.
Yeah, it probably could be.
I think it may be
How many?
start of the year.
That is a good question. When did this timer start? I don't know, because it might just be for
Let me look at mine.
I don't think this is multiple days worth of milliseconds. I don't think so. Because 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So how many milliseconds is this? I don't think this is days worth of milliseconds. It's really not the important part of today, but it's okay. Now, with that being said, these are all referred to as getters. There are also setters. Setters can manipulate the time, the date. You know, right now we're just constructing this date object to get the current system time. Let me look at the constructor and see some different ways to construct date. Yeah.
You can actually. Sorry. read.
For get hours and get minutes, aren't those two supposed to have parentheses?
Yeah, they have parentheses.
No, up top.
Oh, good eye.
You can actually put in a specified date and it'll.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So here's let new date. Let's say my birthday, January 9th, 1985. Now I didn't put in a time, but let's see. Month is 0, which is correct. January represents 0. So it did accept that format. So there's a couple of different ways that you can allow inputs of date objects. We could go 1985 -0 -09. January 9th, 85.
Is it month
9?
first?
Do you need
Then
2 digits?
It is probably is 2 digits for the month. But there's also after the, I'm gonna put a time T. I don't think that's required, but I'm gonna put the time in T 000000. 1985 hyphen 2 digits hyphen 2 digits. Let me try looking at something different here. I'm going to paste in a different date. Okay, so let's change it based on 1985. I had a typo somewhere in there. Maybe it's forcing me to do 01 for January. Oh, That's date? The month is 0. Oh, the date is 17. Yeah, the date is 17, the month is 0. Really interesting. If I put it in as January 01, on the back end, it puts it down to 0. So, kind of a interesting quirk on how that works. I put in 1, it stores it at 0, month 0. So that was my flaw, is that I was trying to actually store it as 0, but no, you have to store it as 1. So kind of looking at the date here. By the way, this is called the constructor, right? You can leave it blank, or you can fill it with some different syntaxes here. When looking at the date constructor, there's a bunch of different options. And this is these are what I was referring to. Right? To put in the year, the month, the day, the hours, the minutes, the seconds, the milliseconds. That's kind of what I was referring to.
If you put in a future date and then do dot get time, it'll give you the time till that date.
That's right. Yeah, that's cool. Very cool. So again, kind of wanted to keep this to about an hour. I kept my promise. It was at 51 minutes on this recording. So we covered 2 important concepts, working with strings and working with dates in JavaScript. And I'm going to stop here.